So this was actually a hard decision. You see, ever since my 2Z Link themed videos, many of you guys have reached out to me with new information as well as arguments against old points I discussed in previous videos. And I really want to do another video covering this pair, but while I want to do that, there has been another highly requested video, and it still has to do with love, but a certain Zora featured in this game. Yeah, that's right. After plenty of requests by you, the viewers, I will finally be talking about the other one who has a theme for Link. And that, of course, is Sidon. Wait, were you expecting someone else? I thought it was obvious that he had some sort of romantic feelings for Link. I mean, who else could we be talking about that is in love with him? Yeah, no one cares, Mipha. Go back to being dead or something. Fine, I'll talk about Mipha. Gosh! Although, admit it, you guys would love to know if Sidon x Link would be a thing. Oh well, I guess I'll just leave that to the fanfictions for now. I mean, how bad could fanfictions get? What are you doing? Get that pair out of here. We don't acknowledge that here. So, I know that you've all been waiting a super long time for this theory. I mean, I first talked about it back in September, and all this time I've been promising it, but only now I'm doing it. And honestly, that was because I wasn't sure about doing it or not. We still had barely any information about Mipha's past, so it would have been less clear what the final verdict would be. But can I just say that I am glad I waited? Because with the sudden release of the Champions Ballad DLC during the Game Awards, a ton of new information has surfaced that will make this a much more accurate theory. So I'll be first looking at the information we already know, and then end it off with the new evidence presented to us in the most recent DLC pack. Now, let me make something perfectly clear. First of all, this is a theory on whether Link has romantic feelings towards Mipha. We already know for a fact that the reverse is true, but I just wanted to make that clear. Second, as a theorist, I only care about one thing, and that is the truth. Whether good or bad, that is all that matters in these videos. Remember, you wanted this, so I am going to look at it from an unbiased perspective. Okay, here we go. So if you thought it was hard to uncover Link's true feelings for Zelda, Mipha is a whole other story. We won't have any flower petal symbolism to help us this time. And while she does end up dying to Calamity Ganon, we can still talk about whether Link had romantic feelings towards her before the events of the Great Calamity. But the real question is, where do we start? There's a lot of small information given to us, but nothing super decisive. I think to fully understand the question at hand, we need to recap Mipha's story. Sometime in Mipha's childhood, she and Link became close friends. Later on, once the threat of Calamity Ganon returning became real, the Divine Beasts were dug up and Mipha became one of the champions to pilot them. Sadly, the plan ended up failing and Mipha, along with the other champions, was killed. Now, it doesn't sound like we have enough to work with, and, well, you're completely right. While the champions play a very important role in the game, most of it's focused on Zelda and Link. So to start, we should head to Zoras Domain to see where it all began and then go from there. In order to stop Divine Beast Vahruta from causing Hyrule to flood, the player heads to Zoras Domain. On the way there you meet Sidon, the Zora Prince, and agree to help him with reclaiming Ruta. You go meet the Cain, where he gives you the Zora Armor that was made by Mipha. This by itself isn't really that big of a deal, until later on you hear from her brother that it was made specifically for Link. Now, if you don't know, the Zora Armor isn't your normal type of gear. If we read the description of it, we can find the following information. Custom armor painstakingly crafted by each generation Zora Princess for her future husband. To the Zora, this is like the equivalent of an engagement ring. And then we hear from Sidon that it is no coincidence that Link was given this armor, as he confirms in the game that Mipha was planning to give it to him. In other words, she was in love with him. You might think this confirms that Link indeed had romantic feelings for her, but the answer isn't so black and white when you step back and look at the whole picture. If Mipha was the only love interest for Link, then that may have been the case. However, there is someone else that ended up having a thing for Link, and that person is Princess Zelda. I already covered her relationship with Link in my very first theory video, so I'll just briefly bring up some things regarding her. We know that originally she did not like Link since he had reminded her of her failures. To her, he had no struggles and was simply a gifted person with no hardships. But after a while, she soon realized that he was just like her. He felt very pressured, and with all eyes on him, he chose to silently bear the burden as the hero who would one day defeat the evil. Sometime during these events, we find out that Zelda had fallen in love with Link. Cass confirms this once we unlock his final son in Rito Village. Her love ends up awakening her power, Link is put in the shrine to recover, and he finally wakes up 100 years later in order to save Hyrule from the wrath of Calamity Ganon. Because of this, Breath of the Wild suddenly follows a recurring trait found in shows known as the love triangle. This occurs very often in anime that have any sort of romance in them. It is when the main character is torn between two different characters that both share romantic feelings toward the main lead. A very common triangle consists of the main character, the childhood friend that secretly has feelings for them but finds it hard to express said feelings, and the other which at first doesn't like the main character, but soon develops romantic feelings towards them. Usually in this scenario, the main protagonist ends up with the latter. Love triangles are very bittersweet because while you may be happy with one pairing, you end up feeling bad for the other. Now, does any of this sound familiar? Because this draws a direct parallel to the story in Breath of the Wild. You have Link, who is the main protagonist with two possible love interests. The childhood friend who has a hard time expressing her romantic feelings toward the main character, and the girl who first hates the protagonist until eventually developing romantic feelings towards them. And I can guarantee that whenever the love triangle is set up like this in anime, the main character always ends up with the latter. So Nintendo could very well be following this rule when it comes to romance. And if that's the case, it is very strong evidence going against the idea that Link is in love with Mipha. There are some loopholes in this rule, however. Example, Toradora. In this show, the character goes from being in love with his close friend to falling for the person who ironically was helping him get closer to the main character's original love interest. Now, hold on here. I know what some of you guys are saying. A Hylian and a fish getting together? That's crazy! And I agree. I mean, even if it could happen, the lifespan of a Zora is so much longer than that of the other races in the game. However, it is possible. All we have to do is look at the evidence within the game. In the side quest Special Delivery, you help a Zora safely deliver a love letter to whoever she has been communicating with. This turns out to be a Hylian named Sazan, but this is where things get very weird. The Zora who asks for your help looks like a small child, and when you compare her to the Hylian, the age difference seems very disturbing. However, since the Zoras have a longer lifespan, this actually would be normal age-wise. Appearances can be deceiving, I guess. This also proves that a Zora and Hylian, despite whatever age, can get together. She even refers to him as her soulmate, and they just met. Let's go a step further. What about marriage in this world? We know that Mipha had made the special Zora Armor to specifically give to Link, and one might think that this confirms Link loved her. You don't just walk up to a close friend and ask them to marry you. However, once again, the game may be telling a different story. In the game, there is a side quest that actually has a wedding in it. First of all, it shows how a wedding in Breath of the Wild plays out pretty similarly to one in the real world. But the most interesting thing happens before that. In From the Ground Up, you are supposed to build a town, well, from the ground up. During the quest, you recruit different people to move into the town in order to provide certain services. One of these is a Gerudo known as Ronson. It only takes recruiting a Rito until you come back and find out that Hudson and Ronson are engaged. Seriously, they've been together for a bit and already want to get married? This leads me to believe that perhaps love doesn't work the exact same way in this world. Why am I bringing this up? Well, from the memory Mipha's touch, Mipha brings up the past when both her and Link were children. This implies that they were pretty close back then. She even says,
"Once this whole thing is over, maybe things can go back to how they used to be when we were young. You know, perhaps we could spend some time together."
First of all, this does imply that they may have been more than friends in the past, but sadly, we know almost nothing about her past relationship with Link. Now, I know what some might be thinking. Perhaps there was some information taken out of this cutscene that existed in the Japanese version. After all, in the Japanese version, Link actually had his own diary entries written in the quest logs. But this was removed from the English version because Nintendo. So, wait for it, I actually looked at the direct translations from the Japanese version. I know, right? We're getting professional here in this his house. Super cringy joke is super cringy. Dane. Here's the problem though. From what I read, Nintendo did a pretty good job keeping the English version the same as the Japanese. I couldn't find anything that seemed suspicious. Now, you might think at this point that it is obvious Link had some sort of romantic feelings towards her. And honestly, I was hesitant to make this video because of that reason. However, then the Champions Ballad DLC was released, and we were given a lot of new information on all the champions. And that includes separate diaries for each one. I was super excited when I found out about the existence of these, since before the DLC we didn't know much about their backstories. Oh yeah, and these entries aren't your usual size diaries. These things are huge. So let's go over all of the new information given. The most important part of Mipha's diary is how we finally get to see how her childhood with Link was like. Before this, we knew almost nothing about her past, which made it very difficult to figure out whether Link had romantic feelings about her. So now it is time to analyze these entries. According to her diary, Mipha first met Link when he was only 4. At this age, he had already become a very good swordsman, and even bested adults. According to her, he made quite a first impression. He was curious and full of energy, with a ready smile. Already this is sounding weird because whenever we see Link, he is always silent and emotionless. But clearly, something happened to him that changed how he was. Now the first question, how long did Link stay at Zora's Domain? Well, we don't really know. The next time Link visits, Mipha talks about how she hadn't seen him in a long time. If we go to Zora's Domain, we can talk to Baz, who brings up some interesting info about Link. According to him, Link helped train him in sword fighting. Me? I am Baz. 100 years ago, you frequently trained me in the art of the blade. Remember? Baz also mentions to Link how he was a member of the group known as the Big Bad Baz Brigade. Try saying that 5 times fast. This implies that Link probably spent a good amount of time at Zora's Domain before he left. So, him and Mipha being very close shouldn't be that surprising. But like I said previously, this isn't the only time Link visited Zora's Domain. We can get more information on this in a diary entry that takes place after Ruta was found. Link came to visit the domain. It feels like forever since he was here last. He no longer resembles the child I first met. She goes on to mention the fact that he now holds the sword that seals the darkness, but this is where things start to get more colorful. However, he hardly speaks anymore, and smiles even more rarely. He is still the kind soul I knew, but something has changed. I asked him if something had happened, if something was wrong. He merely shook his head. Perhaps it is his newly acquired height, but I feel he is ever looking past me, into the distance beyond. Clearly, Link is no longer the person he had been many years ago. The heavy burden he carries caused him to no longer be expressive, and keep his emotions inside of him. The part of him looking past her is also very important. It could be seen as him not having any romantic feelings towards her, but don't worry. That's not all the information we are given. Going further in the entry, Mipha talks about how she accepts Zelda's request of piloting Ruta. After this entry, she now talks about Link visiting her a 3rd time. During these events, Mipha talks about a Linel that has been terrorizing people on Polymus Mountain. She follows him on his way there, and he tells her to stay back. They end up arguing, and the Linel attacks them. However, since Link was very skilled in the swordsmanship, defeating the Linel was no difficult task. Mipha recalls this event in her diary, and this is where things start to get interesting. His kindness and determination to help those in need. His strength and skill. My heart is drawn to his. I am doomed. Mipha finally starts to fall in love with him. And very much like how Zelda began to fall for Link once he saved her from the Yiga, Mipha does the same when Link saves her from the Linel. But in this case, it is a lot more sudden. This also confirms how before this, she never had any romantic feelings towards him. Sure, she loved him as a childhood friend, but not in any romantic way. But here is what, in my opinion, is one of the biggest pieces of evidence proving the one-sided love. In the following entries, Mipha finally says goodbye to her friends and family at Zora's Domain, and then she talks about Link, saying these exact words in her entry. I feel awful for putting them through this, but I must do what I can to help Link. I could never forgive myself otherwise. Speaking of Link, I have at last finished gathering the materials for the armor. I shall start making it at once. Let me ask you this. Why is she making the armor right after the Linel attack if Link does apparently love her? Let me remind you that this entry is right after Link saves her, which implies that it took place not very long after Link's 3rd visit. And as I said previously, it's obvious that Link doesn't have much time to be with Mipha, so after the Linel attack, there was most likely no time for Link to fall in love with her. If anything important had happened, she would have put it in her diary. Mipha even talks about how Link is always around Zelda now, and she rarely gets time to be alone with him. But if that in itself isn't enough to convince you, here is the final nail in the coffin. Mipha goes on to say this in her diary. According to the old legend, long ago a Zora princess fell in love with a Hylian swordsman. Perhaps there is hope. This refers to Ocarina of Time, where Princess Ruto had fallen in love with the hero of time. This love, however, was one-sided. It's ironic, and huge foreshadowing, that Mipha's love is, like Ruto's, one-sided towards Link. Another hint can be found in her cutscene for the Champion's Ballad.
One day, Princess, I must leave him to face my fate with Ruta.
Now, at first she appears to be talking about her baby brother Sidon, but what if she's actually referring to Link? This is done very often where one thing is said, but it really means something entirely different. So, the final verdict? Mipha and Link share a bond. A very unique bond solidified by their childhood memories together. However, due to Link's heavy burdens, that sadly is all it is. Mipha's love for Link, while heartfelt, was one-sided. It truly is a tragic story for a tragic character, one who clearly still holds on to the pain she had felt 100 years ago when Link was taken away from her. But I ask now, is this really a bad outcome? What if she did present the Zora Armor to him? It never is confirmed whether she did or not. But you know what? I think if she did, Link may have accepted it and her feelings. He is in no way heartless. But what would that have meant for the story? Him accepting her love, only to lose her to the Great Calamity? It would have been heartbreaking. Tragic. And I must ask, is that really the ending you would want? I'm going to end off the video with this. If Link had lived a normal life without the pressure put on him, he most definitely would have fallen in love with her. But as a theorist, it isn't my job to talk about what could have been, but the truth. So I will say this to you, if you haven't yet, go play the Champion's Ballad. It adds so much more not only to Mipha, but for the other champions as well, and the story it tells is bittersweet, but it is something worth experiencing. I hope you all enjoyed this theory, and that it was as good as you hoped it would be. And for all you Mipha lovers that now feel empty on the inside, go read some fanfictions. I'm sure you'll find a story that will fill that hole in your heart. And also, Merry Christmas to all of you, and I hope you have a great day. This has been Nintendo Black Crisis, and I'll see you guys later.